What if I told you that missing just one night of sleep makes your brain react to everyday stress the same way it would react to a genuine threat to your life? That when you're sleep deprived, your emotional brain doesn't just get a little more sensitive. It amplifies negative reactions by 60% while simultaneously losing the ability to regulate those reactions. You're not just tired. Your brain is fundamentally transformed into something closer to an anxiety disorder, at least temporarily. Here's the part that should terrify us all. 1 in 3 adults isn't getting adequate sleep. Not occasionally. Regularly. And among teenagers, 4 out of 5 are sleep deprived. We're living in a world where most people are walking around with brains that have been chemically and electrically altered to be more anxious, more reactive, more vulnerable to depression. But here's what almost no one realizes, and what scientists have only recently discovered. This isn't just correlation. Poor sleep doesn't just happen to people with anxiety and depression. It actively creates these conditions, rewiring neural circuits, disrupting the brain's overnight emotional processing, and setting in motion a cascade of changes that can persist long after a single sleepless night. Tonight, we're going to explore something that could change how you think about your own mind. This isn't just a story about feeling tired. It's about how the absence of rest literally reshapes your brain's architecture, alters your perception of reality, and quietly determines whether you'll face tomorrow with resilience or with dread. Imagine your mind as an ocean. During waking hours, waves of thoughts, emotions, and experiences crash against the shore continuously. Sleep is the tide that smooths the sand, that allows the debris to settle, that restores the shoreline to a state of calm readiness for the next day. But when sleep doesn't come, when the tide refuses to turn, the beach becomes cluttered with the remnants of yesterday's storms, and tomorrow's waves have nowhere clean to land. Now here's the twist that changes everything. For decades, doctors and researchers assumed that sleep problems were merely symptoms of anxiety and depression. You feel depressed. Naturally, you can't sleep. You're anxious. Of course you lie awake at night. Treat the mental health condition, the thinking went, and sleep would automatically improve. They were wrong. Research conducted at Stanford University by Dr. Andrea Goldstein Pekarsky revealed something that upended this entire paradigm. Sleep and mood don't have a one-way relationship where one causes the other. They have what scientists call a bidirectional relationship, meaning the connection flows both ways, like a conversation where each voice continuously influences the other. But the implications are far more profound than that sounds. People with insomnia are 10 times more likely to develop depression than those who sleep well. 10 times. But here's where it gets truly unsettling. They're 17 times more likely to experience clinical anxiety. These aren't small increases. We're talking about odds that should make us fundamentally reconsider how we think about both sleep and mental health. The statistics paint a sobering picture of our collective struggle with rest. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, more than 1 in 3 adults in the United States fails to get adequate sleep on a regular basis. Among teenagers, the situation proves even more concerning, with nearly 4 out of 5 adolescents reporting insufficient rest. At the same time, more than 1 in 5 adults experiences a mental health condition. The overlap between these populations is substantial and significant. But here's something that should fundamentally change how we think about prevention. Sleep problems often emerge as one of the earliest warning signs of developing anxiety or depression, appearing months or even years before other symptoms become apparent. A study published in the Avon Longitudinal Study of Parents and Children followed adolescents over time and discovered that sleep difficulties predicted future mental health problems. The implications are staggering. If sleep disturbances appear first, this could suggest that addressing sleep issues early might actually prevent more serious psychological challenges from taking root. We're not just talking about treating symptoms. we might be looking at a window for genuine prevention. But understanding this connection requires us to look beyond simple correlations. We need to examine the mechanisms, the biological and psychological processes that link the night's rest to daytime emotional well-being. We need to explore how specific stages of sleep contribute to emotional regulation, how the timing of sleep matters as much as its duration, and how the brain's response to sleep loss creates vulnerability to mood disorders. In the sections ahead, we'll trace the pathways through which sleep influences mental health. We'll discover how a single night of poor rest can amplify emotional reactions by more than half. We'll learn about the unique neurochemical environment of REM sleep and its role in processing difficult emotions. We'll understand why our internal body clocks, when misaligned with our schedules, can contribute to depression and anxiety. And importantly, we'll explore the evidence-based treatments that can break the cycle and restore both sleep and emotional balance. This journey begins with understanding what sleep actually is and why its absence reverberates so profoundly through our psychological landscape. Sleep is one of the most fundamental biological processes, yet paradoxically, one of the most mysterious. Every mammal sleeps. Every bird sleeps. Even fruit flies exhibit sleep-like states. This universality suggests that sleep serves functions so critical that evolution has preserved it. Across millions of years, despite the vulnerability it creates, a typical night of sleep consists of multiple 90 to 110-minute cycles. Within each cycle, the brain transitions through distinct stages: non-rapid eye movement sleep, which includes light sleep and deep slow-wave sleep, and rapid eye movement sleep, commonly known as REM sleep. Non-REM sleep dominates the early part of the night. During the deepest stages, slow brainwaves synchronize across the cortex. This is when the body performs physical restoration and when the immune system strengthens. But slow-wave sleep also contributes to emotional regulation. Studies suggest that this deep sleep helps dampen the reactivity of the amygdala, preparing it for more balanced responses to the next day's experiences. As the night progresses, REM sleep becomes increasingly prominent. During REM, the brain's electrical activity resembles the waking state, yet the body remains essentially paralyzed, except for the characteristic rapid movements of the eyes. This is the stage most associated with vivid dreaming. REM sleep plays a unique and crucial role in emotional memory processing, a topic we'll explore in depth shortly. The architecture of sleep, the specific amounts and timing of each stage, changes across the lifespan and can be significantly disrupted in anxiety and depression. People with major depression often show reduced slow-wave sleep and alterations in REM sleep patterns, including earlier onset of the first REM period and increased REM density. These changes aren't just symptoms. They may contribute to the persistence of depressive symptoms. But perhaps most relevant to our exploration is sleep's role in emotional regulation. Throughout each day, we encounter events that trigger emotional responses. Some of these experiences need to be remembered, their emotional significance preserved so we can learn from them. Others need to be processed in ways that reduce their emotional intensity, allowing us to move forward without being overwhelmed by past distress. Sleep appears to accomplish both functions simultaneously. It consolidates emotional memories while diminishing the visceral, physiological arousal associated with those memories. The result is what some researchers describe as overnight therapy, a natural process in which we retain the lesson without carrying forward the full burden of the original emotional reaction. When this restorative process is disrupted, the consequences extend far beyond simple fatigue. The brain's capacity to regulate emotions becomes compromised, setting the stage for anxiety and depression to develop or intensify. For many years, sleep problems in people with depression or anxiety were viewed primarily as symptoms. If someone felt depressed, naturally their sleep might suffer. Treatment focused on addressing the mood disorder, with the assumption that sleep would improve once the primary condition was resolved. This perspective has undergone a fundamental transformation. Longitudinal studies following people over years demonstrated that sleep disturbances frequently precede the onset of mood disorders. In one study involving 10,000 adults, people with insomnia were 5 times more likely to develop depression and 20 times more likely to develop panic disorder compared to those who slept well. The relationship operates in both directions. Depression and anxiety can cause sleep problems through racing thoughts, hyperarousal, and disrupted rhythms. Once sleep problems develop, they worsen mood symptoms, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. Dr. Elizabeth Blake Zacharin at Columbia explains that sleep functions like a charging system for the brain. When sleep is insufficient, the brain's capacity to regulate emotions and cope with stress becomes compromised. The effects appear after even a single night of poor sleep. University of Pennsylvania research showed that when volunteers were restricted to 4.5 hours of sleep nightly for 1 week, they reported feeling significantly more stressed, angry, sad, and exhausted. When normal sleep resumed, mood improved dramatically. Understanding this reciprocal relationship helps explain why breaking the cycle requires intervening at multiple levels. The most effective approaches recognize the interconnected nature of these problems and target both simultaneously. To truly understand why sleep has such powerful effects on anxiety and depression, we need to examine what happens inside the brain when sleep is adequate, and crucially, what changes when sleep is lost. Modern neuroimaging techniques, particularly functional magnetic resonance imaging, have allowed researchers to observe the living brain as it processes emotions, revealing stark differences between rested and sleep-deprived states. At the center of this story are 2 brain regions that work in concert to regulate emotional responses: the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure deep within the brain's temporal lobe, acts as an emotional sentinel, rapidly detecting potentially significant stimuli in the environment and triggering appropriate physiological and behavioral responses. It's particularly sensitive to threatening or negative information, which makes evolutionary sense. Our ancestors who quickly identified dangers had better chances of survival. The prefrontal cortex, especially its medial and ventromedial regions, serves a regulatory role. It evaluates emotional responses initiated by the amygdala, provides context, and modulates reactions to ensure they're appropriate to the situation. Think of the amygdala as an alarm system, and the prefrontal cortex as the thoughtful evaluator that determines whether the alarm represents a real emergency or a false alert. In a well-rested brain, these regions maintain robust functional connectivity. The prefrontal cortex exerts what neuroscientists call top-down control over the amygdala, dampening excessive emotional reactions and enabling measured, contextually appropriate responses. This neural conversation allows us to experience emotions without being overwhelmed by them, to feel anxiety in genuinely dangerous situations without feeling anxious all the time, to experience sadness without descending into despair. Sleep deprivation fundamentally disrupts this delicate balance. And when I say fundamentally, I mean in ways that shocked even the researchers who discovered it. In a landmark 2007 study conducted by Dr. Seung-Shik Yu and Dr. Matthew Walker at the University of California, Berkeley, researchers used functional MRI to examine brain responses to emotional images in people who had been awake for 24 hours, compared to those who had slept normally. What they found was almost hard to believe. Sleep-deprived participants showed a 60% amplification in amygdala reactivity to negative emotional stimuli. 60%. That's not a subtle shift. That's a transformation. But here's the part that makes this truly alarming. At the same time, the amygdala was becoming hyperreactive. The functional connectivity between the amygdala and the medial prefrontal cortex was significantly reduced. The regulatory system was weakening precisely when it was needed most. In practical terms, this means the sleep-deprived brain generates stronger emotional reactions while simultaneously having less capacity to regulate those reactions. It's like removing the brakes from a car while pressing harder on the accelerator. The emotional alarm system becomes hypersensitive, responding intensely to stimuli that would normally elicit only mild reactions, while the regulatory mechanisms that would typically modulate those responses are weakened. And here's where the picture becomes even more unsettling. This neural signature of sleep deprivation, increased amygdala activity, coupled with decreased prefrontal control, bears a striking resemblance to patterns observed in people with anxiety and depression. Individuals with major depressive disorder often show heightened amygdala reactivity and altered prefrontal amygdala connectivity, even when well rested. Anxiety disorders are similarly characterized by exaggerated amygdala responses to threat-related stimuli and impaired prefrontal regulation. Based on this similarity in brain patterns, we can infer that sleep deprivation may temporarily create a brain state that mimics these psychiatric conditions. This could help explain the mechanism by which chronic sleep problems contribute to the actual development of clinical anxiety and depression, not just mimic their symptoms temporarily. The effects extend beyond the amygdala and prefrontal cortex. Sleep deprivation also impacts the hippocampus, a structure crucial for memory formation and emotional context. Research by Dr. Matthew Walker and colleagues demonstrated that sleep-deprived individuals show reduced hippocampal activity when trying to encode new memories. This impairment doesn't just affect neutral information, it specifically compromises the brain's ability to distinguish between safe and threatening situations, a process called pattern separation. When pattern separation fails, the brain may generalize fear and anxiety from genuinely dangerous situations to safe ones, a hallmark feature of anxiety disorders and post-traumatic stress disorder. One night of sleep deprivation has been shown to increase fear generalization, making people more likely to feel anxious in response to neutral stimuli that merely resemble something that previously caused fear. The implications here suggest that chronic sleep loss might actually train the brain to be more anxious over time, not through psychological learning, but through fundamental changes in how the hippocampus processes environmental information. The neurochemical environment of the sleep-deprived brain also differs substantially from the rested state. Norepinephrine, a neurotransmitter associated with arousal and stress response, shows altered patterns. Serotonin and dopamine, both crucial for mood regulation, become dysregulated. Even the concentration and sensitivity of neurotransmitter receptors change with chronic sleep deprivation, potentially contributing to long-term alterations in brain function. Early brain imaging studies using positron emission tomography showed that sleep deprivation leads to significant declines in cerebral glucose metabolism, particularly in the prefrontal cortex. This reduction in metabolic activity may help explain why executive functions, higher-order cognitive processes like planning, decision-making, and emotional regulation that depend heavily on the prefrontal cortex are so vulnerable to sleep loss. Together, these findings paint a picture of a brain that, deprived of adequate sleep, becomes simultaneously more reactive and less regulated, more prone to negative, emotional states, and less capable of managing them effectively. This neurobiological vulnerability provides a mechanistic explanation for why poor sleep increases risk for anxiety and depression, and why improving sleep can have such beneficial effects on mental health. Among all the stages of sleep, rapid eye movement sleep occupies a special place in the landscape of emotional health. But here's something that will change how you think about dreams. During REM sleep, the brain creates a neurochemical environment that exists nowhere else in nature. Brain activity increases to levels approaching or even exceeding waking levels in the limbic system. But what makes REM sleep truly unique is a dramatic shift in neurochemistry that researchers discovered by accident. Levels of norepinephrine, the brain's primary stress neurotransmitter, dropped to nearly zero. Let me repeat that, nearly zero. This represents the only time in the entire 24-hour cycle when the brain is both highly active and essentially free from this arousal-promoting chemical. Dr. Matthew Walker and colleagues have proposed the sleep to forget and sleep to remember model. Based on this unique neurochemistry, the theory suggests that during REM sleep, the brain can maintain the informational content of emotional experiences while reducing their emotional charge. You remember what happened and why it mattered, but the memory becomes less viscerally distressing. Research has shown that people who obtain REM sleep after exposure to emotional images show reduced amygdala activity when viewing those same images the next day. The emotional reactivity decreased, even though the memories remained intact. Research by Dr. Ninad Gujar demonstrated that REM sleep specifically helps recalibrate the brain's sensitivity to different emotions. Participants who obtained REM sleep during a nap showed reduced reactivity to fearful and angry expressions, while simultaneously showing enhanced recognition of happy expressions. Those who stayed awake didn't show this recalibration. This process appears disrupted in certain conditions, and here's where the implications become profound. People with post-traumatic stress disorder often experience fragmented REM sleep and repetitive nightmares. Some researchers theorize that in PTSD, the normal emotional processing of REM sleep fails, leaving traumatic memories with full intensity intact. Studies have found that individuals with PTSD show altered theta activity during REM sleep and, critically, elevated norepinephrine levels that may interfere with this stage. If this theory is correct, it suggests something remarkable. PTSD might not just be a psychological condition, but also a sleep disorder, where the brain's natural overnight therapy has been disrupted. The repeated nightmares wouldn't just be symptoms. They'd be failed attempts at emotional processing. Beyond the amount and quality of sleep, the timing of sleep relative to our internal, biological rhythms plays a crucial but often underappreciated role in mental health. Every cell in the human body operates according to circadian rhythms, roughly 24-hour cycles, orchestrated by a master clock in the brain's suprachiasmatic nucleus. These rhythms regulate not just sleep and wakefulness, but also body temperature, hormone secretion, immune function, metabolism, and neurotransmitter production. When these rhythms synchronize properly with the external environment, they support optimal health. When they fall out of sync, the consequences can be profound. Modern life presents challenges our circadian systems didn't evolve to handle. Electric lighting, shift work, jet lag, late night screen time, and irregular sleep schedules all disrupt circadian alignment. The relationship between circadian disruption and mental health has emerged as a major research focus. Studies have consistently found associations between late chronotype, a preference for evening activities, and later sleep times, and increased rates of depression and anxiety. One large Dutch study involving nearly 2,000 people found significant associations between late chronotype and depression and anxiety. But here's where it gets truly surprising, and where the research revealed something even scientists didn't expect. You might assume that being a night owl is only problematic if you're forced to wake up early, creating a mismatch. If that were true, night owls who slept on their natural schedule should be fine, right? Wrong. Research led by Dr. Jamie Zeitzer at Stanford found that people who went to bed late and woke late had higher rates of depression and anxiety, regardless of their intrinsic chronotype. Even natural night owls appeared to benefit mentally from earlier sleep-wake timing. This finding shocked the research team. What could explain this? Dr. Zeitzer suggests this might reflect what people actually do during late-night hours. Late night is when decision-making tends to be poorest, When social media use becomes more negative, when the combination of reduced prefrontal function and social isolation creates a perfect storm for mental health problems. The mechanisms connecting circadian disruption to mood disorders are complex. Circadian rhythms directly regulate neurotransmitter synthesis and release. They influence cortisol secretion timing. Core clock genes are expressed in brain regions central to emotional processing. Studies in rodents have provided experimental evidence that circadian disruption alone can trigger mood changes. Mice exposed to abnormal light-dark cycles display reduced exploratory behavior and increased anxiety-like responses, even in otherwise healthy animals. Human studies of shift workers provide compelling real-world evidence. Meta-analyses have found that shift work is associated with nearly doubled depression rates. Flight attendants show elevated rates of sleep disorders, depression, and anxiety compared to the general population. When we think about sleep deprivation, fatigue might seem like the most obvious consequence, but the effects of sleep loss extend far beyond simple tiredness, creating a cascade of changes that collectively increase vulnerability to anxiety and depression. The cognitive impacts are well documented and wide-ranging. Working memory declines significantly. Tasks requiring sustained attention become increasingly difficult. Decision-making processes become impaired, with sleep-deprived individuals showing reduced ability to integrate information and inhibit impulsive responses. Perhaps most concerning from a mental health perspective is how sleep deprivation affects emotional decision-making. Studies have shown that sleep-deprived people make riskier decisions and show reduced sensitivity to negative consequences, while showing exaggerated focus on potential rewards, a pattern that can contribute to poor life choices and increased stress. The perception of the social world also changes under conditions of sleep deprivation. Research demonstrates that sleep-deprived individuals become less accurate at reading other people's emotions from their facial expressions. They tend to misinterpret neutral expressions as negative, perceiving hostility or displeasure where none exists. This perceptual bias can create or worsen interpersonal conflicts. These cognitive and perceptual changes don't occur in isolation. They interact with the emotional dysregulation we've discussed to create a perfect storm. Someone who's sleep-deprived has an overreactive amygdala, a struggling prefrontal cortex, misinterprets social cues as threatening, makes poor decisions that create additional stress, and lacks the cognitive resources to solve problems effectively. Each factor amplifies the others. The physical health consequences add another layer of risk. Sleep loss affects metabolic function, elevates blood pressure, and weakens immune function. Chronic inflammation increases, a factor implicated in both physical diseases and depression. These physical health changes may contribute to mental health problems both directly, through inflammatory processes that affect brain function, and indirectly, through the psychological burden of dealing with physical illness. The cumulative effects of sleep deprivation can be subtle at first, building gradually as sleep debt accumulates. People often adapt subjectively to chronic sleep restriction, feeling less sleepy over time, even as objective performance measures continue to decline. Studies examining chronic partial sleep restriction show particularly insidious effects, with performance continuing to deteriorate over weeks while people lose awareness of how impaired they've become. Of all sleep disorders, insomnia has perhaps the most intimate and insidious connection with anxiety. Insomnia affects roughly 10% of adults chronically. Among people with anxiety disorders, insomnia rates soar to more than 50%. And here's the truly sinister part. The cycle can become self-sustaining, even after the original trigger disappears. The mechanism is straightforward in concept. Anxiety activates the stress response system, triggering cortisol release, increasing heart rate and muscle tension, and elevating physiological arousal. This state is fundamentally incompatible with the relaxed state needed for sleep onset. When someone lies in bed, worried, their nervous system remains activated, preventing the transition into sleep. Pre-sleep worry is particularly problematic. Unlike worry during the day, which might prompt action, worry in bed has nowhere to go. There's nothing productive to be done at midnight, yet the mind continues generating anxious thoughts. This maintains arousal and prevents sleep, which provides more time for worry, creating a feedback loop. Over time, a second layer of complexity develops, and this is where the trap truly closes. The bedroom and bedtime. Routines become associated with the frustrating experience of failed sleep attempts. Classical conditioning takes hold. The sight of the bed or the ritual of preparing for sleep begins to trigger anxiety about not being able to sleep. This phenomenon, called conditioned arousal, transforms the bed from a place of rest into a source of stress. Think about that for a moment. The one place that should signal safety and relaxation becomes a trigger for anxiety. Your bedroom, through no fault of your own, has been transformed into a place your brain associates with frustration and failure. Once this association is established, a new form of anxiety emerges, anticipatory anxiety about sleep itself. People begin worrying during the day about whether they'll be able to sleep that night. As bedtime approaches, tension increases. They may delay going to bed to avoid the anticipated frustration, or they may lie awake for hours, mentally monitoring their level of wakefulness, which paradoxically maintains arousal. The cognitive components include unhelpful beliefs. I must get 8 hours, or I'll be unable to function. If I don't fall asleep soon, something terrible will happen. These beliefs increase pressure around sleep, making it even more elusive. The harder someone tries to force sleep, the more likely they are to remain awake. Breaking the insomnia anxiety cycle requires addressing both the physical arousal and the cognitive behavioral patterns that maintain it. This is precisely what cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia accomplishes, which we'll explore next. While anxiety's relationship with sleep is often characterized by difficulty falling asleep and hyperarousal, depression's impact on sleep is more variable and complex. Some people with depression experience insomnia similar to that seen with anxiety. Others sleep excessively, a pattern called hypersomnia, yet wake feeling unrefreshed. Many experience early morning awakening, spontaneously waking hours before their desired time and unable to return to sleep. The architecture of sleep changes in characteristic ways in depression. People with major depressive disorder often show reduced slow-wave sleep, the deepest and most restorative stage. The first REM period of the night tends to occur earlier than normal, sometimes within 30 to 40 minutes of sleep onset, rather than the typical 70 to 90 minutes. REM sleep density, the frequency of rapid eye movements during REM periods, is often increased. These architectural changes aren't merely symptoms. They may represent biological markers of depression and contribute to its persistence. Some research suggests that REM sleep abnormalities predict which individuals will respond to certain antidepressant medications. The early morning awakening pattern deserves special attention. People experiencing this pattern fall asleep without difficulty, but wake in the pre-dawn hours with minds immediately active, frequently focused on negative or distressing thoughts. The inability to return to sleep leaves them facing several hours of darkness with a brain primed for negative rumination. This pattern may relate to disturbances in circadian rhythms and the timing of cortisol release. Hypersomnia in depression presents its own challenges. People may sleep 10, 12, or even more hours, yet wake feeling tired and unrefreshed. They may have difficulty getting out of bed, experiencing what's sometimes described as leaden paralysis. They may nap extensively during the day, yet still feel fatigued. This excessive sleep doesn't appear to provide the restorative benefits of healthy sleep, possibly because the quality and architecture remain disturbed despite the extended duration. The relationship between sleep and depression shows the same bidirectionality we've seen with anxiety. Approximately 75% of people with major depression report sleep disturbances. But studies following people over time show that insomnia predicts future development of depression, with one meta-analysis finding that people with insomnia have twice the risk compared to those without sleep problems. This suggests that treating sleep problems might prevent some cases of depression from developing. Given the central role of sleep disturbance in anxiety and depression, effective treatments for sleep problems can have profound impacts on mental health. Among all interventions for insomnia, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, commonly abbreviated as CBTI, has the strongest evidence base and is recommended as first-line treatment by major medical organizations. CBTI is a structured, multi-component treatment typically delivered over 6 to 8 weekly sessions. Unlike sleep medications, which provide symptomatic relief only while being taken, CBTI teaches skills and creates behavioral changes that persist long after treatment ends. The theoretical foundation rests on the three-factor model. Insomnia develops through predisposing factors, like genetic vulnerability, precipitating factors, like a stressful event, and perpetuating factors, the behaviors and thoughts that maintain insomnia long after the trigger has resolved. CBTI focuses on the perpetuating factors. The core components include sleep restriction, stimulus control, cognitive therapy, sleep hygiene education, and relaxation training. Sleep restriction therapy involves initially limiting time in bed to match actual sleep time, even if this means only 5 or 6 hours initially. This creates mild sleep deprivation, which builds sleep pressure and consolidates sleep. As sleep efficiency improves, time in bed gradually increases. Stimulus control therapy addresses conditioned arousal by establishing strict behavioral rules. The bed should be used only for sleep and sexual activity. If unable to fall asleep within 15 to 20 minutes, the person should leave the bedroom and engage in a quiet activity until feeling sleepy. Wake time is standardized. Napping is generally discouraged initially. Cognitive therapy targets unhelpful beliefs about sleep. The therapist helps identify distortions like catastrophizing about poor sleep consequences or unrealistic sleep expectations. Through examination of evidence, these thoughts are challenged and reframed. Sleep hygiene education covers environmental and behavioral factors. Relaxation techniques help reduce arousal at bedtime. Research evidence for CBTI is extensive. A meta-analysis of 20 randomized controlled trials found average improvements of 19 minutes in sleep, onset latency, and 26 minutes in time awake after sleep onset, with a 10% improvement in sleep efficiency. These might sound modest, but for someone struggling for years, these changes can be life-transforming. But here's the part that should fundamentally change how we think about treating insomnia. Studies comparing CBTI to sleep. Medications have found equivalent short-term efficacy, but vastly superior long-term outcomes for CBTI. The benefits persist for years after treatment, while medication effects end when the drug is discontinued. In other words, CBTI doesn't just mask symptoms the way medication does. It actually teaches the brain new patterns, creates lasting changes that continue to support healthy sleep. The impact extends beyond sleep itself. Multiple studies have demonstrated that successfully treating insomnia with CBTI leads to reductions in symptoms of anxiety and depression, even when the treatment doesn't specifically target those conditions. One large clinical trial showed that CBTI significantly improves symptoms across multiple mental health conditions. By restoring healthy sleep through CBTI, the brain regains its capacity for effective emotional regulation, stress resilience improves, and vulnerability to anxiety and depression decreases. While cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia represents the most comprehensive treatment for chronic sleep problems, there are foundational practices, often grouped under the term sleep hygiene, that support healthy sleep for everyone. These evidence-based strategies create conditions favorable to sleep and can prevent minor sleep difficulties from escalating into chronic problems. The sleep environment matters substantially. Humans evolved to sleep in darkness, and our brains interpret light as a signal that it's time to be awake. Creating a dark sleeping environment supports the brain's natural transition into sleep. Temperature regulation is equally important. Keeping the bedroom cool, typically between 60 and 67 degrees Fahrenheit, works with the natural cooling of core body temperature that facilitates sleep onset. The timing of various activities influences nighttime sleep. Morning light exposure, particularly bright outdoor light, helps set the circadian clock and promotes alertness during the day, while supporting sleepiness at night. Conversely, bright light in the evening, particularly the blue wavelengths emitted by screens, can shift rhythms later and interfere with sleep onset. Exercise generally supports better sleep, though timing matters. Regular physical activity helps consolidate sleep and increases deep, slow-wave sleep. Morning or afternoon exercise appears most beneficial for most people. Caffeine, a stimulant with a half-life of roughly 5 to 6 hours, can interfere with sleep even when consumed many hours before bedtime. Limiting caffeine to the morning hours helps ensure it doesn't interfere with nighttime sleep. Alcohol presents a particularly tricky case. While it may facilitate sleep onset, alcohol disrupts sleep architecture, suppresses REM sleep initially, and causes fragmented, lighter sleep as it's metabolized. The sleep obtained after drinking alcohol tends to be less restorative. The pre-sleep routine deserves special attention. Creating a consistent, calming sequence of activities in the hour before bed signals to the brain that sleep is approaching. This might include dimming lights, gentle stretching, or practicing relaxation techniques. The specific activities matter less than their consistency and calming nature. Perhaps most challenging in modern life is managing electronic device use before bed. The content on screens can be mentally activating, while the light emitted suppresses melatonin. Establishing a digital sunset, a time after which screens are avoided, supports better sleep. The challenge of implementing sleep hygiene recommendations is that they often require changing deeply ingrained habits. Approaching these changes with self-compassion and realistic expectations helps. Small adjustments, made incrementally, are more sustainable than trying to overhaul every aspect of sleep hygiene simultaneously. Remember how we started? With the shocking fact that missing just one night of sleep makes your brain react to stress as if it were facing a life-threatening danger? That your amygdala amplifies negative reactions by 60%, while your prefrontal cortex loses the ability to regulate those reactions? Here's the final piece that should change everything. 1 in 3 adults isn't getting adequate sleep regularly. That means roughly 100 million Americans are walking around with brains that have been chemically and electrically altered to mimic anxiety disorders. 4 out of 5 teenagers are in the same state. We're not talking about a small group of people with clinical sleep disorders. We're talking about a majority of the population living in a chronic state of brain dysfunction. But here's what makes this both terrifying and hopeful at the same time. Unlike many factors that contribute to mental health problems, sleep is modifiable. You can't easily change your genetics. You can't undo past trauma. You can't always change stressful life circumstances, but you can change your sleep. Fizz. Research we've explored demonstrates that sleep is not merely rest, not simply the absence of waking activity. It's an active, essential process during which the brain performs critical maintenance functions that determine your mental health. During sleep, emotional memories are processed and integrated. The balance between emotional reactivity and regulation is recalibrated. REM sleep provides overnight therapy, allowing you to keep lessons while releasing trauma. Circadian rhythms synchronize your internal biology with the external world. When sleep is chronically inadequate or poorly timed, these essential functions are compromised. The amygdala becomes hyperreactive. Prefrontal regulation weakens. Emotional memories retain their full distressing intensity. Circadian rhythms drift out of alignment. The brain's ability to distinguish safe from threatening situations deteriorates. The cumulative effect creates a state of vulnerability in which anxiety and depression can more easily take hold and persist. But these processes can also work in the opposite direction. And this is where hope enters the picture. Restoring healthy sleep through behavioral interventions like CBTI, environmental modifications that support sleep hygiene, or circadian-based treatments like bright light therapy allows the brain to resume its natural regulatory functions. Neural circuits begin to function more normally. The 60% amplification in amygdala reactivity reverses. Prefrontal control is restored. Emotional resilience increases. The vulnerability to psychological distress decreases. What makes this particularly meaningful is that for many people, addressing sleep may not require complex medical interventions or expensive treatments. Small changes in behavior, environment, and thought patterns can have profound effects. Going to bed and waking at consistent times, getting morning light exposure, creating a dark, cool sleeping environment. Challenging unhelpful thoughts about sleep. Breaking the conditioned association between bed and wakefulness. For those struggling with more severe insomnia, CBTI has been proven effective with benefits that persist for years, superior to medication in long-term outcomes. For those with circadian misalignment, interventions targeting rhythm disruption can alleviate both sleep problems and mood symptoms. For those with anxiety and depression, treating sleep should be a central component of comprehensive care, not an afterthought. The scientific understanding of sleep psychology continues to evolve. Researchers are uncovering ever more detailed mechanisms linking specific aspects of sleep to particular features of anxiety and depression. New treatment approaches are being developed and refined. The relationship between sleep and mental health is becoming increasingly well characterized at molecular, cellular, circuit, and behavioral levels. Yet amid all this scientific complexity, the most powerful insight remains. Beautifully simple, sleep matters. The quality, timing, and consistency of sleep shapes emotional experience, capacity for resilience, and vulnerability to psychological distress. Prioritizing sleep isn't self-indulgent. It's an essential investment in mental health. For anyone listening who struggles with sleep, with anxiety, with depression, or with all three, please understand that the cycle can be broken. The patterns that maintain these problems are strong, but not unbreakable. Help is available, whether through professional treatment like CBTI, through informed self-help approaches, or through sustained attention to sleep hygiene and behavioral patterns. The journey toward better sleep and improved mental health isn't always linear. There will likely be difficult nights, setbacks, and periods of frustration. But understanding the deep connection between sleep and emotional well-being provides a roadmap, a framework for understanding what's happening and what might help. Each small improvement in sleep can have ripple effects on mood and resilience. Each successful intervention for anxiety or depression can make sleep more accessible. As you prepare for sleep tonight, whether it comes easily or requires patience, remember that those dark hours aren't empty time. They're when your brain performs some of its most important work, processing the day's experiences, regulating emotional systems, preparing you for tomorrow. That 60% amplification in emotional reactivity we talked about at the beginning, it can be reversed. The disconnection between your amygdala and prefrontal cortex, it can be restored. The vulnerability to anxiety and depression, it can be reduced. You're not broken. Your brain is designed to regulate emotions, process experiences, and maintain mental health. But it needs sleep to do that work. Give it that opportunity. Support it with healthy behaviors, and be patient with the process. If you found value in this exploration of sleep psychology, consider supporting this channel by liking this video and subscribing for more deep dives into the science of the mind. Your mental health matters. Your sleep matters. And understanding the connection between them might be one of the most important things you can learn. May your nights be restful, your sleep be restorative, and your days be marked by the emotional balance that healthy sleep makes possible. Good night, and sleep well.